Right. Good morning, everybody. We have a nice crowd here in the room and some on Zoom, and I've no doubt that we will be listening to it recording as well. This is a particularly difficult shiur for a number of reasons. Those of you, and I can see quite a few of you who are regulars at the our shiurim, at my shiurim that I give, will know that my style is very analytic, very slow. Sometimes we only do about 4 words in a whole shiur. We've done 17 pages in 4 years of Gemara. We have done we've done Sefer Yoshua, Sefer Shoftim, and half of Sefer Shmuel Aleph in about 8 years. Maybe a bit longer than that. So we don't go very quickly. That's my particular style. So for me today to give what is an overview of an entire Sefer is actually very difficult for me because that's not the usual way that I work. However, it's very important. The reason it's so important is that we are taking on board here a project for the shloshim of the victims of the Simchat Torah massacre. Now, this program of the national learning of Tanakh, the national siyum of Tanakh, has been, as I think, instituted by Matan. And Netanya has been allocated Sefer Yirmiyahu, the book of Jeremiah. Every town that's taking part in this national siyum has been allocated a book of Tanakh to learn. And on a Wednesday evening, there will be a Zoom national siyum. Shoshana will send out the link to the actual siyum in due course. We are going to try and have something here as well, so that we can mark it particularly in our community as well, as rather just sitting at home on our Zooms. But the main thing is to take part in the siyum. The siyum is to recognize le'ilu nishmat, to elevate the souls of the people who were massacred, and to also in the zechut of those who are fighting on our behalf, those who have been kidnapped and are in danger. The importance of learning, le'ilui nishmat, what does that mean? It means to elevate the soul. Once a person has left this world, it's almost like, it's at the end of an exam. You remember, that feeling at the end of the exam when you put your paper in and you say, well, that's it now. Can't do any more. I can't go away and learn another subject and hope it'll come up in the exam. It's over, right? And that's feeling that you are now hopeless. You are now in the hands of the marker, right? Of the examination marker. And you then just have to wait for your result. A person who leaves this world is now bereft of the opportunity of doing mitzvot. He then has to wait until his din v'cheshbon, until his examiner, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, marks his paper, his life, and says, okay, you get an A star, you get a B plus, and you get a C minus, right? Or what have you. But there's a difference. There's a difference because in the example that I've just given you, it's all over. There's nothing else you can do. But we believe that we back down here in this world have an opportunity to give those who've left this world a bit of a hand. We can actually take their paper before the examiner gets it and add a few extra bits into it. We happen to know the answer to that question. Yeah, I can believe it. That we know the answer to that particular question, and we can insert the answer for them. No, not right now. No, not right now. So we haven't got time. We've got an hour. I've got to get through the whole of Sefer Yirmiyahu in an hour. It normally would take me about 6 years, right? So the idea is that we can do things which is le'ilui nishmat. Our learning here is, as it were, answering a few extra corrections on the paper of those that have left. And that's the whole point of the Shloshim. Often many people learn the whole of Shisha Sidrei Mishnah for the Shloshim. We here, Matan has taken on to learn the whole of Tanakh across the country, and we're all taking part in that. We have 52 chapters in we have 52 chapters in Yirmiyahu. According to my last look at the Google Docs, we have 5 chapters which are not yet taken. And by the end of this morning, those 5 chapters will be taken either by anybody here in the room or by people on the Zoom, or if not, by me. So we will have finished, we will have taken on board, our community here will have taken on board to learn the whole of Sefer Yirmiyahu before Wednesday night. Shoshana's just arrived now, so she will tell us later on, hopefully, what we're going to do to mark this Siyum here. We haven't actually discussed it yet, but we will do something here to mark the Siyum as well as the taking part in the national Siyum. So we are doing something here, not only for ourselves, because of course, every time you learn something, whatever it is, whether it be something Jewish or something secular, knowledge is power. Knowledge is happiness. The more knowledge you have, the more complete a person you are. And learning, for learning's sake alone, is very, very worthwhile. So we're doing this for ourselves, of course, but we're also doing it le'ilu nishmat, to give those people who have now no longer chance to do their own mitzvot in this world. We're doing it for them, as it were, to give them a better mark in their exam. And we're, of course, doing it in the merit of those who are fighting for us at the fronts. I'm sure we've all got family, friends who are in danger, at risk, and putting themselves at risk for our safety. And this learning is all for them as well. So that's the reason why we are doing this Sefer Yirmiyahu over the next few days. I'm not quite sure why Wednesday night was chosen as the Shloshim. I was trying to work it out. The reason I was actually trying to work out when the Shloshim is because some of you may notice that I look a little bit on the scruffy side. And my beard's all over the place, my hair's all over the place. And the reason for that is deliberate, because I lost 1,400 brothers and sisters on Simchat Torah. And I wanted to recognize that Avelut. I wanted to feel that I was in Avelut for my brothers and sisters. And every time I look in the mirror, which is not very often, to be honest, but every time I see it, I think, oh, what a mess you look. Oh, I remember why I'm a mess now. And when people said, a few people have said to me over Shabbat, isn't it about time you had a trim? And I explained to them why I've not had a trim. They said, oh, wow, and that was exactly the reason. So I was trying to work out when the Shloshim was, so that I could actually, have a haircut and what have you. And I couldn't work it out really, because no, Shloshim goes from the burial, not from the death. Shloshim goes from the burial. And these poor souls were not buried for several days. We don't know when. So I don't know why they chose Wednesday night specifically, but because I couldn't work it out, because really I was also like you trying to think about this. Well, from the day of Simchat Torah, Shloshim is actually today. But obviously it goes from the burial, not from death. So anyway, that's the idea of what we are doing now. I don't know how many of you here in the room, just a show of hands if you want, how many of you signed up to do a chapter of Yirmiyahu? Okay, quite a lot. Okay, and on Zoom as well, quite a few. Those of you who haven't, who want to do so afterwards, can either speak to me or Shoshana. As I say, there are 5 chapters that are left. If those are filled, it doesn't matter if you learn, if more than one person learns another chapter. All learning is wonderful, and all of it is going to be taken into account, as it were, in the examination, when the examination papers are marked. So that's the idea of what we're doing now. Why Sefer Yirmiyahu? Because that's what we were given. And I have to say, Shoshana will tell you, my first reaction was, oh, couldn't they have chosen a more miserable Sefer? Yirmiyahu. And what do we call Jeremiah has become has become an English expression. I don't know if the Americans have the same expression. Jeremiah is known as the prophet of doom, and I remember my parents used to use this. My mum particularly used to use this expression. Oh, you're all right, Jeremiah. You are. Right, you know, if somebody would come and say something miserable and say, "Oh, you're right, Jeremiah." It's a miserable Sefer, right? What else did Jeremiah write? What other book did he write? Eicha, Lamentations. Eicha. It doesn't come any more miserable than that. So that was my first reaction, and then I said, "Okay, well, it is what it is. We've been given Yirmiyahu," and Shoshana suggested that as an introduction to this, that I would give an overview, and I thought, well, that's a good idea. Now, I've never learned Sefer Yirmiyahu in detail. I've read a little bits of it here and there, and I know that he was a miserable old man, and he wrote Eicha and all that stuff. I didn't know really too much about it. So, you know, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. So I thought, I'm going to give you a shiur on this. I better find something else about it over the last few days. And I found in my bookcase, surprise, surprise, in my bookcase, this book here, Jeremiah, The Fate of a Prophet by Rabbi Binyamin Lau, Beni Lau. And I spent most of my waking time on Shabbat when I wasn't here, reading this Sefer in preparation for today. Absolutely fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Once you've learnt your Jeremiah, and we've done our siyum, I recommend that you get this book and read it because it's really, really interesting. He takes a completely sideways look, really, at how Sefer Yirmiyahu is put together, and how his prophecy and how his life was. It's a very interesting book. What I'm going to go through today is largely based on a bit of historical background, and largely based on the introduction, Beni Lau's introduction to this Sefer, because it will allow us just to get a flavor of what we're doing. Because obviously, most of you have taken one chapter, maybe 2 or 3 chapters. To learn the whole of Sefer Yirmiyahu, even to read the whole of Sefer Yirmiyahu before Wednesday night, is a bit of a challenge. Certainly to learn it all properly is not possible. And so I'm going to give you, as much as I can, a little bit of an overview of the whole book. So the first thing we need to know is my 2 favorite words: historical context. Okay, Jeff's, how many times have you heard that? Quite a lot. Historical context. We have to know when we're talking about him. So Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, when did he live? What period of time are we talking?
Babylonian.
Babylonian time. Well, yes, partly. Yes, that's true. About 700, bit before. He actually lived, according to most opinions, he lived in the 6th century, 7th and 6th century BCE, and he was the prophet under 4 kings, one of whom don't really count because he wasn't king for very long. But his main prophecies were during the reign of 3 kings. First one was Yoshiyahu, Josiah in English. And the second one was Yehoiakim. And the third one was Tzidkiyahu. Okay, now you may have heard of some of those. You may have heard of Tzidkiyahu because he made some tunnels, didn't he? Right? We've heard. Okay. Anyone know anything more about him? No, probably not very much. But he lived. Yirmiyahu was a prophet during these 3 periods. Now, in order to understand what was going on at that time, you first have to take a step back and understand what was the role of the prophet at that time. Okay, what was his job?
See, the advisor to the king. Actually, the advisor.
Okay, Philip says he was the advisor to the king. one of his roles was to advise the king, but he was not in actual terms an advisor to the king, as it were, an appointed advisor to the king. That's the whole point of a prophet in those days, was that he was not connected with the king. He was an independent person, not connected to the king, as it were, in his pay or in his favor. What did somebody else say here? What did you say, Solly? A conduit between God and the people. That's for sure.
Sometimes.
Truth to power. That's a beautiful expression. Truth to power. Now, that's if he was a true prophet. Okay. Now, the job of a teacher. Okay. Well, yes, a teacher, in as much as a prophet would be trying to correct behavior of the people. A prophet, my very sort of simple understanding of the prophets, this is for the British people, of a prophet, comes from my childhood watching TV, a program called Up Pompeii with Frankie Howard, right? I can see that many people, you won't know what this is, Faye. It was a program that was on TV when I was a small child. Frankie Howard. I was a sort of, I don't know, 8, 10, 12, 13, something like that. It was a bit risque, and was full of double entendres and innuendos. And as a teenager or a young boy, I thought it was the funniest thing, because it was saying all sorts of rude things that I wasn't really meant to know about. But the reason I say that was this, of course, was this program was set in Pompeii in the Roman times, which was, of course, by the way, the eruption of Vesuvius, which destroyed Pompeii, took place in the same year as the destruction of the temple in 70 CE. That's just a by the way. Anyway, so this program Up Pompeii had a prophet, and he used to walk up and down. Do you remember this? He used to walk up and down the long roads there and there, and he would say, "The end is nigh. Prepare to meet your end." And this was the prophet of doom. This was the Jeremiah of the day. And so this was my idea of a prophet, came from, I mean, pathetic, isn't it? That was my idea of a prophet in those days, came from Up Pompeii. But actually, it wasn't so far from the truth, because this is what a prophet was meant to do. A prophet was meant to bring the people to their senses.
Some of them got killed. Wasn't Jeremiah?
Well, many of the prophets suffered tremendously. Some of them were killed. Most of them had very difficult lives. Why?
Couldn't make a profit.
They couldn't make a profit. Very good, Solly. Very good, Solly. They couldn't make a profit. Okay, most of them had very difficult lives because they were going against the zeitgeist. Okay, they were going against what the people were doing. By definition, they were not saying what people wanted them to say. Now, this was one of the problems that Yirmiyahu had, because Yirmiyahu was the person at the time who was saying things that the king didn't want to hear, the people didn't want to hear, and a whole bunch of other prophets, in inverted commas, didn't want to hear. Because how do you distinguish between a true prophet and a false prophet? Well, you can only distinguish it actually retrospectively. But at the time, if you're living in the time of Yirmiyahu, and Yirmiyahu is saying what he says in his book here, which you're going to learn, which is, Jewish people, you need to mend your ways. Doom is on its way. Destruction is on its way. And there's a whole bunch of other people saying, don't listen to him. He's just a miserable old thing, and he's not telling you the truth. It's all going to be fine. We're going to fight the Babylonians. We're going to win. It's all going to be fine. And you're the people. How do you choose? How do you know who is the true prophet and who is the prophet of doom? Well, exactly. When you look at what's going on, yeah, absolutely. So the one of the signs of a true prophet is whether he is pandering to the people, and or whether he has the guts to stand up in the face of the criticism of the people and is willing to sacrifice himself for his prophecy, for his views. Okay? Now, that's one of the signs of a true prophet. The other sign of a true prophet is whether he loves his people. Okay? Is he willing to put himself in danger for his people? Or is he just doing it for self-aggrandizement? You know, we see people who say things, and they say things that we wonder whether they really mean them. And would you put your money where your mouth is? Then you've got to wonder.
The question of is it a job or is it a vocation?
Okay, that's a good way of putting it. So one of the things that Rabbi Lau says here, which actually struck a chord with me, is that the prophet is today's public intellectual, the person who is the weather vane of society, somebody who is willing to say, this is where society is going. We need to be looking at society, and we need to be asking ourselves, are we going in the right direction? And he says like this: the comparison of the prophet to a public intellectual is intended not to diminish the importance of the former, the prophet, but to emphasize the responsibility of the latter. Okay, and he says it's difficult to distinguish a true prophet from a false one, but certain hallmarks of true prophecy may be found. The first is the prophet's readiness to pay a personal price for his views, which is what I was just saying. Now, there was nobody that paid a higher price than Jeremiah. Jeremiah was thrown in jail for his views. He was vilified. He was attacked, and ultimately he was killed. And he did not waver from his views. So that's a very important thing. So let's have a quick look at the idea of prophecy being the outlying voice, because that's what this prophet was doing. Look at the prophets that we know well. Shmuel. What did Shmuel do? Shmuel was the one that said to the people, okay, you want a king? No, you shouldn't have a king. What you're asking for is not right. He was going against the people. As it so happens, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, let them have a king. They'll get a king, and you'll see what will happen with them. And of course, we know what happened with Shaul, etc. Nathan, the prophet Nathan, what was his most famous act? Yeah, King David sinned with Bathsheba. Who was it that had the guts to stand up to David, Melech Israel? David, the king of the entire Israel, probably the most unified king in the whole of our history. Who stood up to him? Nathan HaNavi. That's the job of the Navi. The job of the Navi is, I don't know, I just thought of this, maybe it's not right, but it's just popped into my head. Maybe the Navi is the upper house. In England, we have the House of Lords, which is meant to be the check and balance against the House of Commons. In the States, it's the Senate and the House of Representatives. There has to be a check and a balance. Back in the day where the king was all powerful, there needed to be a check and a balance. And as Solly said, the prophet was that conduit between that higher authority, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to the king. So the prophet was an incredibly important person, usually vilified and usually failed. Nearly every prophet in Tanakh fails. The one glaring exception to that is who? Yonah.
Johnny, can
Yonah-
you just
Yes, Johnny.
Johnny, could you just explain how a prophet was appointed a prophet?
He was not appointed a prophet.
Or how did he
The word
become
of
a
God
prophet?
came self-appointed, Johnny. Self-appointed.
Self-appointed. Okay.
Remember Shmuel? What?
Yeah.
Shmuel was lying in bed there when he was the servant of Eli HaKohen, and the Kodesh Baruch Hu's voice came to him, and he thought it was Eli speaking to him. Only when he realized that Kodesh Baruch Hu was speaking to him, he realized that he had this prophecy. A person is a prophet when he believes that he is speaking the words of God. It doesn't necessarily mean that God speaks to him physically, as we read in Shmuel, but a prophet, and today's prophet, would be somebody who believes that he is putting forward the correct and honest version of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants in this world. That is what a prophet is. So you didn't have an election to say, shall we have Natan or shall we have Chaim Yankel? No, it was a self-appointed. Where was I before that? We were talking about Yonah. Yes. So Yonah was the only successful prophet, really. He went to Nineveh eventually after he'd run away and all that stuff. And he went to Nineveh and he said, if you don't repent, you don't mend your ways, it's all over. You're going to be destroyed. And what did Nineveh do? They repented. And what did Yonah say to God? Now look what you've done. Right? Now what does it make me look like? I'm talking a load of nonsense. I told them they were going to get destroyed and they're not being destroyed. Was it? Makes me look like a false prophet. That's what Yonah said. He wasn't very happy, really. And it's noteworthy, is it not, that the only prophet that was actually successful was with the Goyim, right? When the prophets come to tell us, did we listen to Yirmiyahu? No, we didn't. Did we listen to Yeshayahu? No, we didn't. So this is been the lot of the prophet, to be that weather vane, that conduit through which the word of God reaches the people. And it has been the lot of the prophet almost at the end of it to say, told you so. You know, if I was Yirmiyahu, when it came to the destruction, I'd be sitting there like this saying, told you so. You didn't listen. He didn't, of course, he was lamenting. But, you know, you could understand if that was the feeling, because he did tell them so. And that was what we're going to see here in Yirmiyahu. So let's look at the prophecy of Yirmiyahu. First of all, let's look at the individual person that he was. First of all, we have to say that he was an incredibly strong person. What he went through, the persecution that he went through for his views, his life was endangered more than once. There's a sentence here that Rabbi Lau wrote, which I underlined as being really core. The inner truth that burned within him took him to such extremes that he eventually betrayed the kingdom of Yehuda. Wow, what a statement that is. What does he mean by that? He goes on to say, under siege, during an attempt to expel the enemy from the walls of Jerusalem, he called for his people to cross the battle lines and surrender. He thus became despised and disparaged in the streets of Jerusalem, a menace to the public good. All rejected him, kings, priests, noblemen, and the masses, because he went against what the people wanted to hear. He told the truth. He wasn't willing to pander to the people's views. He was a man of incredibly strong belief. He was in commune, as it were, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not necessarily in direct speaking the way we understand it in Tanakh necessarily, but he had, as it were, a direct line to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and was absolutely firm and unyielding in his views. So let's have a look at the three different phases of Yirmiyahu's prophecy. Let's start with the reign of Yoshiyahu. The reign of Yoshiyahu. Now, Jeremiah was only a young man, almost a child, during the reign of Yoshiyahu. Yoshiyahu was a reformer king, reformer with a small r. He was a king who brought back religious practice to the people, and he at first was very successful. And in fact, when Yirmiyahu was prophesying during Yoshiyahu's reign, he was barely acknowledged. Yirmiyahu was barely acknowledged, possibly because he was so young, and possibly because Yoshiyahu was actually doing rather well without him. Problem was that it all ended in tears for Yoshiyahu because he made the wrong decision. He backed the wrong horse. This was a time in history. Again, historical context is everything. This was a time in history when Yoshiyahu was successful in bringing the people into a good state, was where there was a sort of a hiatus between the superpowers. The superpowers of the time were Bavel, Ashur, Syria, and Egypt. And there was this sort of hiatus there where they were all having a bit of a standoff and waiting for something to happen. And Yoshiyahu took advantage of that and had a powerful, relatively powerful anyway, independent state of Yehuda. And what he tried to do was to unite the people. By this time, of course, the kingdom had split into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Yehuda, Judah. Yoshiyahu was the king of Yehuda, and he had started to try to bring back the tribes of Israel, the 10 tribes in the northern country of Israel, to try and reunite the people, which had not been united since the days of Shlomo HaMelech. And then along came the superpowers, Egypt and Babylon, as it so happens at this time, and they started to be a battle. Now, where is Egypt in relation to
South.
Israel? South. Where is Bavel? Northeast. Okay. What's in the middle?
Israel.
Us, right? So it's inevitable, is it not, if you have a battle between Babylon and Egypt, that one of the most strategic points is going to be Eretz Israel.
Now it's Iran and Egypt.
Same thing. Same thing. Egypt's not so powerful now, but it doesn't matter. That's why this place is so strategic. And at that time, it was equally strategic. So there's a battle between Egypt and Babylon. Yirmiyahu tells Yoshiyahu to side with Babylon, and he doesn't listen, and he sides with Egypt. We haven't got time to go through it all. You'll read it all in the chapters that you're doing. And Yoshiyahu dies in battle, a battle of Megiddo, which was an unnecessary battle. He brought it upon himself, and he dies through that. He didn't listen to the prophecy. That was Yoshiyahu. And then the second part of his of Yirmiyahu's prophecy was during the reign of Jehoiakim. Thank you. Yeah, Jehoiakim. They just escaped my head then, of Jehoiakim. Now, the second phase is Jehoiakim. Now, Jehoiakim was a puppet of Egypt. He was a faithful follower of Egypt and its culture. He was, in fact, a vassal of the Egyptians because he was only made into the king. He was the son of Yoshiyahu, but there was one before him. I told you there were 4 kings in the lifetime of Yirmiyahu, and I said one of them didn't really count because he didn't last very long, and that was Yechoniah, who was Jehoiakim's older brother. And he was deposed by the Egyptians. The Egyptians came along, kicked him out, and inserted Jehoiakim as the king, as a puppet of the Egyptians. Okay, so Jehoiakim was a faithful follower of Egypt. Why? Because if otherwise, he'd have suffered the fate of his brother. Now, during this period, what Yirmiyahu concentrates on is the behavior, the violent behavior, and the anti-Jewish behavior. In other words, not looking after the vulnerable, all the things we talked about over Shabbat, about Amalek, all the things that were going on there by the ruling class. The ruling class at that time were violent and corrupt and callous towards the Hamon Am, to the people. And Yirmiyahu was railing against this during the reign of Jehoiakim. And of course, that wasn't very popular. So he was thrown in jail. That was one of the things he was done. Halfway through Jehoiakim's reign, a new boy comes on the block up in the northeast, a chap by the name of Nebuchadnezzar, who you might have heard of. Okay, he comes to power halfway through Jehoiakim's reign, and what happens here is Yirmiyahu starts a different tack. He sees, as it were, this is mixing my prophets here a bit, but he sees the writing on the wall. Okay, he sees the writing on the wall, and he sees that Nebuchadnezzar is going to be is the rising power, and he advises and he starts calling for surrender and subjugation to the Babylonian Empire. Okay, and for the rest of his life, this was what he was saying: serve the king of Babylon and live. Okay, Yirmiyahu, and I'm reading a statement here from what Rabbi Lau has written here, another statement which I underlined as I was going through. Yirmiyahu believed that there was no point in dying on the altar of an imaginary independence. Imaginary independence. It's a very powerful expression. What Yirmiyahu was saying to Jehoiakim was, what are you pretending that you're independent for? You're not independent at all. You're in the hand of the Egyptians. And I'm telling you that the Egyptians are going to fall. The rising...
Comparable to what's happening today.
Well, we'll come to what's happening today towards the end, and we'll try and leave some time for contemplation of that in a minute. Let's just get the history going here. So Yirmiyahu says, as it were, to Jehoiakim, who are you trying to kid? You're not independent. You're in the hand of Egypt. And I'm telling you that Egypt's days are numbered. So if you're going to be in the hand of anyone, you want to change sides, mate. You want to be subjugating yourself to Nebuchadnezzar. Because if you don't, there's going to be destruction. Okay? Better serve the king of Babylon and live than dying on the altar of imaginary independence. Subjection to Babylonia would allow religious and cultural autonomy in Yehuda and Jerusalem, whereas resistance would lead to destruction. The same thing that happened 500 years later, was it 500 years? A bit more than 500 years later, the end of the Second Temple with the Romans. There was the debate, wasn't there, between those that said, surrender to the Romans, at least we'll have some kind of Jewish life here in Eretz Israel under Roman rule, against those that said, no, we're going to fight the Romans to the death. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was one that was for going underneath the rule of the Romans. So this was history repeating itself, but it started here with Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu...
choose your master.
Yeah, it's a question of choose your master if you've got no choice. That's right, exactly that. So what happened was that the people didn't listen to Yirmiyahu. He was, another expression which he uses here, he was like a gadfly. He was an irritation to the kings and to the people in power, because he's going along saying, you know, with his placard saying, the end is nigh, you know, up Pompeii, all I'm going to end in doom. You've got to change your ways. And he was a two-pronged attack here from Yirmiyahu. It was, first of all, change your ways, the way you're behaving towards the people. You're behaving badly. You're following false gods. You are cruel. You are not behaving in an appropriate way. The social fabric of society is broken down. And on the other hand, he's saying, idiots. If you exactly what Sully said. Choose your master. You've got to have a master here. It's imaginary, this independence. We're not independent. And why are we not independent? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu hasn't given us our independence. And why has he not given us our independence? Because we're not behaving properly. So it all comes full circle. So Yirmiyahu tried desperately to get the people to see this. And everybody around them were just docilely following the king and following their Egyptian masters. He uses this expression here. They followed their Egypt infatuated king. Why was he infatuated? Because they were made him a king, right? The kingmaker is the king, okay? And of course, he was persecuted by Jehoiakim. Why? Because he was seen as undermining the authority of the king. In the laws of Israel, somebody who is mored b'malchut, somebody who rebels against the king, what is the punishment for that? Yeah, death penalty, off with his head. Actually, I think it's stoning, not off with his head. But anyway, he doesn't survive. So that was the bulk of Yirmiyahu's prophecy. The first part under Yoshiyahu was the introduction. The main part of his prophecy, where he tried to be that political commentator of his day to try and get people to change their ways, was in this period of Jehoiakim. And then the final prophecies, which is the ones that we're most familiar with, because they're the ones of doom and gloom, took place during the Babylonian rule under a different king, Tzidkiyahu. Now, Tzidkiyahu was to Babylon as Jehoiakim was to Egypt. Remember those things you used to get in the 11 plus? You did the 11 plus, didn't you, Peter? Yeah. Cat is to dog as cat is to mouse. Yeah. So Tzidkiyahu was the puppet of Nebuchadnezzar, in the same way as Jehoiakim was the puppet of Egypt. So now you've got another situation where you've got imaginary independence, only this time it's under Nebuchadnezzar. And during the kingdom of Tzidkiyahu, it was a much more divided kingdom. Under Jehoiakim, Yirmiyahu was battling almost on his own. He was almost a lone voice. Whereas in the time of King Tzidkiyahu, there was a significant split. There were a significant number of people who did feel like Yirmiyahu, who were pacifists. And then there was the opposite faction, the nationalist faction, if you want to call it, who was spurred on by another prophet, Yirmiyahu's opposite number, if you like, whose name was, anybody know who that was? His name was Hananiah ben Atzur. Hananiah ben Atzur. And even those people, remember, before the destruction of the temple, there was a first exile. Remember, there were two exiles in the first temple. There was if you like, a mini exile in the rule of Nebuchadnezzar. A whole bunch of people were sent away, and they went off to Egypt. And then later on, there was the destruction. Nebuchadnezzar came, destroyed Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and exiled the rest of the people. But even amongst those people who'd already been exiled during the reign of the previous king to Tzidkiyahu, was Yechoniah. Those people were divided as well between pacifist and nationalist lines. And so the prophecies that you see, during this period, which is the period immediately before the destruction of the first temple, these are the prophecies that are so frightening and unsettling for us and familiar to us. These are the Jeremiah that we know. These are the when you think of Yirmiyahu, these are prophecies, these last prophecies, where he's saying, it's over. You've got to change your ways. It's almost too late. And then it is too late. nobody knew which side would prevail here, whether the pacifists would prevail and Nebuchadnezzar would be pacified and say, okay, you can carry on with certain restrictions. You can stay here. You Jews can stay here in the land of Israel under my tutelage, under my power. You'll have to pay tribute. You'll have to do all sorts of things, but you can stay. Or whether the nationalists faction was going to succeed and they were going to fight against Nebuchadnezzar. Yirmiyahu knew that if the latter was to occur, it was over. They wouldn't win. This was a battle they couldn't win. But he didn't know whether he could persuade the people to come along and not die on the altar of imaginary independence, as we said before. Finally, the king, Tzidkiyahu, sided with Hananiah and decided to fight. And what happened? He brought upon himself and upon his people destruction, exile. One of the prophecies that we are all very familiar with of Yirmiyahu, but may not know that it came from Yirmiyahu, is the prophecy that the Babylonian exile would last for 70 years. We're all familiar with that, aren't we? All knew that was a prophecy. How do we know? What are we familiar with that from? From the Purim story, right? That's one of the backgrounds to the Purim story. Is one of the Midrash tells us that Achashverosh, when he was having his party at the beginning of Megillat Esther, I'll ask Sharon to lane it for us. If she wasn't so shy, she would do it. Okay, the beginning there of Vayehi b'mei Achashverosh. What was going on there? What was that big party all about? The big party was that 70 years were up and the people had not returned to Eretz Israel. So Achashverosh was celebrating. See, your prophecy's all wrong. Turns out they'd not calculated it right and all that stuff. We know about that. But that was the prophecy of 70 years comes from Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu says that that you'll be exiled for 70 years. Now, my own view is that was not to be taken literally. My own view is that Yirmiyahu was not saying after 70 years you'll come back. I think that was grasped by the people as a hope, as a hatikvah, as a hope of future redemption. What do we say about what is special about 70 years? It's the span of a person's life. Yeah, 70 years and 10. Yeah, Shivim Shana is the life of a man. What, in my view, what Yirmiyahu was saying when he said that it's going to last for 70 years, you're finished. It's gone. It's finished. It's over. The whole of your life, it's gone on. And it will fit with the majority of his prophecies, which were prophecies of doom. So he didn't know which way it was going to go. So in the end, we know what happens. And then, of course, when it does happen, we get the further prophecies. I suppose is a difficult thing to call it prophecies, but we have the further writings and musings and lamentations of Yirmiyahu in Eicha. Okay, in Eicha, which in many ways is the postscript to Yirmiyahu. It's Yirmiyahu saying, yeah, look what's happened. You know, there's no element in there, as far as I can see, there's no element in there of saying, I told you so, it's all your own, you know, you should have listened to me. What he's saying is, woe is us. Eicha, how could this happen? How could this happen? And that's how Yirmiyahu's life, as it were, spans. He starts off a young man in the reign of Yoshiyahu, trying to improve the people's behavior. He then spends a long time under the king Yoyakim, trying to get them to realize that this infatuation with Egypt and Egyptian culture and this violent behavior, this unruly behavior, this cruel behavior to the people is going to end in disaster. And when he sees he's not successful in that, he then spends his time trying to get the people to realize that they've backed the wrong horse, and they need to then make themselves subservient to the Babylonians in order to preserve something. Better to serve the king of Babylon and live. Better to serve the king of Babylon and to have a Jewish presence in Eretz Israel under whatever circumstances it will be, than the alternative, which is the destruction of the temple and exile from the land. And then the final part of his life was spent lamenting the fact that it all happened, sadly, as he predicted. So you could argue that although he was not a successful prophet in the way that Jonah was a successful prophet, you could argue that his prophecies were vindicated, because what he said, all those terrible things that he said would occur, occurred. And then he spent his time. So he was a tragic character. And yeah, he had a good record. No, he wasn't recognized because people didn't want to see. They didn't want to see what they were being told. Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly the point. It says exactly about the people. What happens in the lifetime of a prophet does not speak about the success or failure of the prophet. It speaks about the success or failure of the people. Now, I suppose not the exact equivalent, but a similar idea is that another expression that you'll be familiar with, and that is the people get the leader that they deserve. Okay, we're familiar with that too. And in some ways, the people got the prophet that they deserved. The prophecy of Yirmiyahu, the life of Yirmiyahu, was a tragic prophecy. There are little bits within Yirmiyahu which are hopeful, but they are small parts. Now, what's interesting here, I just want to finish, and then we'll have questions if there are any. I want to talk about a little section here that Rabbi Benny Lau writes about, because it's very interesting for us. And that is Yirmiyahu in Zionist eyes, through Zionist eyes. I'm going to read you something, and I want you to tell me if any of you know who said this. There is no doubt that the greatest prophet who arose in the days of the kings before the destruction of Jerusalem, as well as the most despised, downtrodden, and daring, was Jeremiah. He was not afraid of imprisonment, of torture, even of death itself, and always chose to speak the bitter truth until the bitter end. He knew that invincibility would not last forever, and was sure that soon enough, certainly within 70 years, Babylonia would tumble and fall. Jeremiah loved his people and had faith in its posterity, and his faith has proven true until this very day. Anybody know who said that? Anyone? Not Jonathan Sacks, no.
Canterbury?
Not the Archbishop of Canterbury. Ben Gurion. Correct. Well done, Ben Gurion. David Ben Gurion said that on his 84th birthday in Sde Boker in October 1970. Interestingly, Yirmiyahu was not taught at all in the Israeli secular education system, except for one little bit, and that only began after the 1990s. Which bit of Yirmiyahu do you think was learned, and why after the 1990s? That would be a great question for a Chidon Tanakh. Okay, anyone know?
About buying the land from to do Pidyon Karka.
Not what I'm thinking of. You may be right, Esther, but it's not what I'm thinking of. I'll tell you. It's the assassination of Gedaliah. Gedaliah was the last governor of Israel, and Yirmiyahu speaks about that. And in Israel, in secular Israel, the only chapters of Yirmiyahu which is studied as part of the curriculum is the assassination of Gedaliah. And that only began in the 1990s after the assassination of Rabin. Instead of Yirmiyahu being, in Ben-Gurion's eyes, the greatest prophet, in the eyes of the modern Israeli leaders, the two prophets who were seen as the greatest ideological prophets were Yeshayahu and Amos. Shimon Peres, in a celebratory Knesset session marking 100 years of Zionism, Shimon Peres, then the head of the opposition, praised Bible study as a basis for developing a renewed Jewish identity. Peres asserted that, quote, the Labour Party views Amos and Yeshayahu as the two great ideological harbingers. MK Yossi Sarid interjected that in the light of the national situation, it could be that Yirmiyahu is the most relevant. And this is what was said here. This was said during Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's first term of office, a month after the opening of the Western Wall tunnels, the resurgence of Saddam Hussein's regime, and the Taliban's victory in Kabul. Ein Chadash Tachat HaShemesh. So we have here my first reaction when Shoshana said to me, we've been assigned Yirmiyahu. My first reaction was, oh, that's terrible. Can we get something else? Can we change? But actually, having spent some time thinking about it and reading about it, there is no more relevant and poignant and important Sefer that we here in Netanya could learn for this Siyum Tanakh than Sefer Yirmiyahu. We've only got till Wednesday night to do this Siyum, and so therefore, by definition, our learning here is going to be somewhat superficial. Those of you who have taken on yourself chapters, try and learn your chapter with that background in mind. Try and get into the mindset of that chapter, but don't worry if you can only get a superficial reading of it till Wednesday. Doesn't mean you're not allowed to learn it after Wednesday night. Okay, I'm hoping that it will trigger your interest so that you will go away, you'll buy this book or somebody else's book on Yirmiyahu, or go online. Although actually, I don't recommend going online and putting in Sefer Yirmiyahu, because you'll get up 999 sites out of 1,000 are Christian Bible sites. There's not much there. I did it for you. You don't have to do it, okay? You need to try and find some proper Jewish sources. This is very, very good. I'm sure that there are, if you go, I didn't have time to do it because this was all very last minute, but I'm sure if you go on to VBM, Virtual Bet Midrash of Yeshivat Har Etzion, I'm sure there will be shiurim. It's Faria will have stuff. Yeah, VBM will have stuff. Yes, Shoshana's going to tell where else we can get stuff. Okay, let me repeat that for the Zoomers and the recording. Let me say that again. If you go on the OU Tanakh site, what's it called, Shoshana?
Tanakh Yomi.
Tanakh Yomi, yeah, Tanakh Yomi. On the OU site, you can put your chapter in and get information about that. So, Nach Yomi, okay, Nach Yomi. Okay, so the idea of what we're trying to do here is that, yeah. So I've tried to give you today just a flavor of what was going on when Yirmiyahu wrote his Sefer. If you go onto those Christian sites and you go onto Wikipedia, they'll tell you that Yirmiyahu didn't write it and it was written by somebody. Maybe, who knows? Not relevant. What we are doing here is we are learning Tanakh. We're not learning Christian history. We are learning Tanakh Le'ilui Nishmat. And I hope that's given you a little bit of an introductory flavor of what's going on. And Bli Neder, we will try and learn Yirmiyahu in detail at some point in the future. the moment we in our Tanakh shiur are still heavily into Shmuel Aleph. We're just about coming to the climax of the Shaul and David story. We've got a long way to go before we get to Yirmiyahu. And at the speed we go, I'm not sure, how many of us will still be alive when we get there. So if we're going to do that, it may well be, if we're going to do Yirmiyahu,
The name is Jeremiah.
if we're going to do Yirmiyahu in that same style, then it's going to have to be as an additional shiur. I don't know when we're going to fit that in. Maybe Bli Neder, after the war is over and everything has settled down, maybe we'll try and find a time when we can learn Yirmiyahu together, if there's enough interest to do that, and hopefully we'll do that. So I'm going to stop there. I'm first of all going to ask for any questions in the room, and then I'm going to see if there's any questions on Zoom, and then I'm going to ask Shoshana to say a few words about the Tanakh Siyum that's going on and the background to it. Yes, Philip.
Okay, you didn't get there, but you said you might, but we didn't have the time. If you compare Babylon and Egypt to the United States and Russia today, would you say that the situation is comparable and that history is repeating itself?
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, it's a long political discussion, and it's probably not for now, but yeah, I think that's a fair point. Let's face it, we are pawns of the Americans, and Hamas, Hezbollah, and all the Houthis and all those lot are pawns of the Iranians and the Russians. We're not kidding ourselves here. We are. It's our battle because it's on our back door, but we're fighting for the rest of the world. Make no mistake. I said this yesterday in Shul. Make no mistake. This is not just a war of Israel against Hamas. This is a war of Islam against the West. It's a war of good against evil, and we are just in the thick of it. We're fighting the world's war. That's absolutely for sure. And it's always been the history that we are fighting the world's war. We are. I can't remember who first coined the phrase that we were the canary in the mine. That's exactly what we are. Any other questions in the room, please, on Yirmiyahu or anything to do with what we've spoken about today or the Tanakh Siyum?
Having gone through this, does he offer a glimmer of hope anywhere?
He does offer a glimmer of hope. His glimmer of hope at the end is that after 70 years we'll come back.
Apart from choosing a new master.
No, yes, at the end he says, after 70 years, however, whether that means 70 years bidiyuk or whether it means a long time, at the end he says, God will not abandon you. You will come back. It will happen. But right now, as he is standing, you have to take your punishment like a man. You've been exiled. Go into exile. Do what you're meant to do, and eventually you come out. So he does come with a glimmer of hope. It's not all doom. There's a glimmer of hope. Yeshayahu has more hope, of course, which is why Shimon Peres preferred Yeshayahu to Yirmiyahu. Yes, Peter.
Could a secular person ever be a prophet?
Ooh, that's a good question. Could a secular person ever be a prophet? I think yes, because a prophet is actually somebody who is a seer, somebody who can see the writing on the wall. I'm not sure. I'm going to ask the question a different way. If somebody is a prophet, by definition, is it possible that he is secular? And I think probably no, because I remember we had a debate once between our shul here and the North Netanya shul a few years ago, and the debate was whether you can be a religious person and not keep the mitzvot. And I was one of the debaters, and my argument was that if you are a religious person, you are by definition keeping the mitzvot, not necessarily all 613 of them, but if you're a decent person and you have social justice and you do all those things, then by definition you're a religious person. So if the seer, if the true prophet is saying correct things, then by definition he's saying the word of God. By definition he's not secular. So I answer your question by turning the question around. Really, I don't personally, I don't necessarily see a prophet as being somebody with long hairs and a long beard, right? The prophet is the person who has the intuition, that message from God, whatever God is, what is the correct way to behave, because that's what this was all about how to correctly behave.
The fact that the prophet was a Yirat Elohim, because there's a whole thing about Yirat Elokim, which we just read now in Vayera, and the whole thing of Abraham had Yirat Elokim. Is that a necessary component of what a prophet has to have?
Yes, it is. Yirat Elokim. The question was, for those who didn't hear, does a prophet have to have Yirat Elokim? I spoke about this yesterday in great detail. Yirat Elokim means ethical behavior. Okay, Yirat Elokim means ethical behavior. Who is described as not having Yirat Elokim? Amalek, who attacked the weak, and Avimelech, who kidnapped a woman against her wish, thinking it was somebody's sister. Doesn't make any difference, sister or wife. Nobody asked Sarah, would you like to come into my harem? He kidnapped her. That's unethical behavior. Avraham Avinu says, Avimelech says to him, Maraita, what did you see that you had to do this? He says, I saw that Ein Yirat Elokim b'makom hazeh. So yes, the whole point of a prophet is that he is the one who's telling us what Yirat Elokim is. And that is ethical behavior. Go and have a look in the prophecy of Zechariah, where we've learned this before on Tisha B'Av a couple of times, where they send a message from Bavel to Zechariah, and they say, we've started to build the second Beit HaMikdash. Do we still need to fast? And Zechariah says, good question. I'll go and ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he goes and asks HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, what are you talking about? I never asked you to fast in the first place. What I asked you to do was to listen to the Nevi'im Rishonim. Listen to the first prophets. That's all I asked you to do. And so, what did the first prophets say? The first prophets say, look after the widow, look after the orphan, look after the vulnerable, social justice. And God says to Zechariah, who passes the message on back to these people, don't care whether you fast or not. But I'll tell you one thing, unless you listen to those prophets who told you what to be, how to behave, social justice, it will happen again.
Look after the Holocaust survivors also.
100%. Look after the vulnerable, look after the weak. Otherwise, it will happen again. It happened again, the end of the second temple. Why did it happen? Because we didn't look after the vulnerable. We didn't look after those people. So we didn't listen. And, are we listening? Have we listened? I don't understand anymore.
David.
Yes, Hangos.
Give David a chance. Let his hand up.
Sorry, you're out of my line with you, Dave. Yes, David.
Well, thank you for an unbelievable shiur. Unbelievable. The second is just to end on a positive note. Was it, and it was, Yirmiyahu, who said to us, Ko amar Hashem, Zacharti lach chesed neurai, ahavat kulotayich, lechtecha charai b'midbar be'eretz lo zerua. I remember the day of our wedding, and Bezat Hashem, very, very soon, we'll be under the chuppah with Hashem.
I think that's where we need to stop, okay? Because David has said, you're right. David has said, after everything, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will remember us. And let's end on that note, a positive note. I'm going to stop the recording now. Those of you here who or on Zoom who want to carry on the discussion, happy to do that. But I'm going to stop the recording now, otherwise it'll go on forever and nobody will listen to it. And so those of you who have not yet signed up, who want to do a chapter, please let me or Shoshana know, and we will allocate you a chapter.
Shoshana's going to tell us what to do now.
Yeah.